Welcome back everybody. Today we will discuss democracy. In the last class we had discussed at great length about secularism. Let me just repeat one word about secularism. There are basically two models of secularism. France is taken as the symbol of the Western model, where the state considers that religion is a private affair and state has nothing to do with religious affairs. So, that is how it looks at it, that religion is a private affair of a citizen and state in its formulation of policies does not consider religion at all. That is how it is. It has grown in many of Western countries. In India, the contexts are slightly different. In India, people of various religion have lived together for centuries together, right from the earliest time. And Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, various schools of Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, which are all considered to be shades of Hinduism, and all these religions have survived in India together and people have been living together for centuries onwards. Thus, in India, the concept of secularism is slightly different, it has grown differently. It basically means that the states are allow practice and propagation of any religion, be it this or that, and further it respects all religions. Individuals in their life also have to learn, and they are, of course, most of the people are, they believe that all religions are true, they have respect for all religions and they believe that we must live peacefully together. That is how secularism in India has a different meaning. And when in the 1970s there was a Khalistan movement, a movement for a separate province for Sikhs, and viewing the experience of a separate province, separate Pakistan on the basis of Islam, naturally the then Prime Minister, the then Parliament of India adopted the 42nd Amendment, where the word secularism was added on to our constitution. Of course, the provisions of secularism are already there, were already there in the new constitution that we adopted in 1950. So, secularism has a different context in India. Now, let us come to democracy. Now, what is democracy? Democracy is basically today means that an elected government, in the most simplest form, that it is representative democracy. Now, we say, how do we say that? Because we have already discussed at length, we the people. So, I have already said that the people are the battery, people are the source of authority, people are everything in our system. Why? Because we are a democracy. Now, democracy has a long history in many countries of the world. Say, it started in Greece, in the Western context, and in the city states, those who were considered citizen, they gathered together and decided all matters of governance of that city. That is, they directly ruled. Of course, women were not empowered, slaves were not empowered, only free men were empowered, whatever it is, a small section of the people directly governed the city states. So, it was not, the power was not vested absolutely in the king or in the senate or in the council, various terms were used. So, a group of people, not one, if it is one, it is dictatorship, it was not oligarchy. I will not get into various forms of governance, but let us remember that when people directly rule themselves, that is called democracy. But people ruling directly themselves, is it possible? It is not possible. Even in the ancient period in Europe, only adult free men who were citizens, they governed, but it was still a large number. But think of today, even a city, Bombay has a population of more than 1.2 crores, 120 lakhs and more people. Delhi has still more people, if you take the greater Delhi. Even Bhubaneswar, which is a small city, grade B city, tier 2 city we say, this has also a population of nearly 13 lakhs today. How can 13 lakh people sit together and decide all governance? very recently we have in Odisha, this is April 2022, very recently we have conducted urban elections, we have conducted local body elections, we have also conducted panchayat elections. So, even in panchayat we have conducted election. So, what will happen? These elected people will sit together and they will decide the governance of these localities, that is panchayats or urban local bodies. So, this is indirect. So, but this is democracy. This is democracy. Who are governing you? Representatives of the people are governing us. How the representatives are selected or elected? They are elected by adult vote. Anybody who is 21 years, 18 years and above can vote, both male and female. So is the case of Lok Sabha, so is the case of the assembly of the state legislative assemblies. So, these people who get elected, they govern, these representatives govern the country or the city or the panchayats. This is called a democracy. The present meaning of democracy is governance through representatives directly elected. Sometimes there can be also indirectly elected. Like Rajya Sabha members are elected by the state legislative members. The president is elected by all the parliament members, Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha and plus assembly members taken together. So, it is representative. Some election has to be conducted and people have to, representatives have to be elected and these representatives in turn govern us. They govern us. So, democracy is basically meaning that the power is vested with the people. That is why some people very light-heartedly say, by the people, for the people, of the people, like that they say, by the people. Let us only discuss by the people, because these people vote. The government has been created by the people. So, you understand further the expression we the people of India. So, thus democracy essentially today means representative democracy, and they have a power to change that government every 5 years. And you know, there has been cases where people have changed governments. There was UPA government in up to 2014, now there is NDA government. The principal partner of UPA was Congress party, now the principal partner of NDA is BJP party. Similarly also, several times parties have come to power, parties have gone out of power also. And there are cases where parties have returned to power time and again. So, it is the people who decide. That is a democracy. That is the essential meaning of democracy for all of us. Democracy can take various forms. Democracy can take various forms. Now, we have a democracy which is called parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy. The other leading countries where parliamentary democracy is there, say for example, United Kingdom or England. There is little difference between UK and England. Let us understand that it is England. So, what is the parliamentary democracy? Parliamentary democracy means there are two houses normally in the parliament in India, in many other places also. One is the Rajya Sabha, which is indirectly elected. One is the Lok Sabha, which is directly elected by the people of India. Now, whoever enjoys majority in that Lok Sabha, that political party or that political leader becomes the Prime Minister. Suppose he loses the confidence of that parliament, of that Lok Sabha, then he has to resign. If he does not resign, president will throw him out. So, president will only appoint somebody who enjoys majority in the Lok Sabha. So, the Prime Minister is also a part of the legislature of the parliament of the Lok Sabha. Not necessarily Lok Sabha, he can be from Rajya Sabha also, as Manmohan Singh was. So, he has to be preferably from Lok Sabha, it is good tradition. So, he has to be a member of the parliament. Not only member of the parliament, he and his council of ministers as a whole are responsible to the parliament. They must enjoy the confidence. They have won the election. But suppose for some reason they lose the confidence, then what happens is that they have to go. That means the executive headed by the Prime Minister in India is responsible to the Lok Sabha. Same is the story in England. The Prime Minister of England is responsible to the House of Commons, which is directly elected by the people of England. That is democracy. Second thing is that it is not a restricted democracy in which we believe. It is universal adult franchise. You will be surprised to know that this concept of universal adult franchise, that everybody who is 18 years above age is a voter. Earlier it was 21, now it is 18. Anybody who is 18 and above is a voter. So, that is how every adult is a voter, male, female or transgender or whatever it is the case, maybe Hindu, Muslim, Christian or one who does not believe in God also, anybody and everybody. Somebody may have gone to school, one may not have gone to school, does not make any difference. There is no distinction at all. That is why it is called universal adult franchise. Same is the story in England. They have a right to vote and you cannot make any discrimination. But this was not the case 100 years back. Even in England, women had no voting right for many years. Even in United States of America, which is a classic example of a democracy, there also women had no voting right. The blacks had no voting rights. The slaves had no voting right for many years. Slavery was there. So, also in England, there were many restrictions. Even in India, initially, only those who had matriculation, those who had passed matriculation were voters. Women had no voting right and all sorts of restrictions were there. But in 1950, when we adopted the new constitution, we adopted the principle of universal adult franchise. And the terms of our parliament and legislatures, state legislatures is 5 years, periodic elections. Then we have responsible government. Responsible means responsible to the parliament. And then in addition we have fundamental rights. Maulik adhikar, fundamental rights are ensured. 6 fundamental rights are there in Indian election. And what are many fundamental, we may not discuss all the fundamental rights, but one of the fundamental rights is the right to seek any office. Anybody who is an adult, some age restriction is there. So, you have to be 30 to be elected to the Rajya Sabha, you have to be 25 to be elected to the Lok Sabha, like that some age restriction is there. Now, no upper limit, only minimum age restriction is there. And if you fulfill the conditions of qualification, anybody can seek to be a member of the parliament. There is no restriction. And when somebody becomes a minister also, if the Prime Minister has confidence in you, he can appoint you a minister. He is not asking whether you have PhD in history or political science, or he is not asking you to be a graduate or this or that. There has been many examples where ministers have proved to be very good in spite of not having much formal education. Particularly great freedom fighters in early days of India's republican age, early days of our democracy, there were many who did not have very high qualification, but proved to be great ministers. Of course, today we find most of the ministers have some education, but not necessarily. For becoming a minister or for becoming a parliamentarian or a member of the state legislature assembly or MLA, no educational qualification is imposed. So, that is what is a responsible government, and they are the executive is a part of the legislature. Why it is a part of the legislature? How is it a part of the legislature? Because the minister is also a member of the parliament. Whether he is from Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha is not the issue, but he is a member of the parliament. In the state also, the minister is a member of the state legislative assembly. And wherever there is a council, there are few places where legislative councils are there, the minister is a member of either of the house, lower house or upper house. So, either he is a MLC or a MLA, as the case may be. So, that is what you find, that they are part of the legislature. the executive is a part of the legislature and is responsible to the legislature. Then there is a list of fundamental rights in case of India, 6 fundamental rights are there, and you can seek any office. You have fundamental right to education, profession, you have fundamental right to freedom, liberty, equality, so many things are there. And if the state encroaches upon it, or the law made by the parliament encroaches upon it, you can approach the High Court and the Supreme Court, and the courts will ensure that you enjoy the fundamental rights. So, you have a mechanism of seeking redressal, grievance redressal, if your fundamental right is contained or violated, to seek judiciary review, and judiciary is duty bound to protect your rights. An independent judiciary. We have an independent judiciary. No, Pakistan is not a great democracy. In pen and paper, Pakistan is a democracy for several years, but no Prime Minister has completed 5-year terms. That is a different story. But recently in the news, the Pakistan Prime Minister has dissolved the parliament. He did not face the no confidence motion. Before voting could take, the deputy speaker abolished, disallowed it, and the Prime Minister approached the President and requested him to dissolve the parliament, and the President has also dissolved it. And now the matter is before the Pakistani Supreme Court. The opposition parties have gone to Pakistan Supreme Court, and Pakistan Supreme Court is likely to give an order in a day or two as to whether the action by the deputy speaker is valid or invalid. So, that means people are seeking a redressal from the judiciary. In India also, there has been cases where in Maharashtra some MLAs were debarred from attending the legislative assembly meeting. Some BJP MLAs were disallowed. Then they went up to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has said, you, the speaker, cannot disallow them for such long period. So, they may be readmitted. So, people go to the Supreme Court, High Court, you can go also to the High Court. So, that is what I am trying to say is that independent judiciary. So, you have fundamental right, you have responsible government, there is periodic elections, there is universal adult franchise. That means right to give vote. If you have these things, then legally speaking, it is a democratic government. So, all citizens without any discrimination are allowed freedom of speech, thought, expression and association. Because we are a democracy, I will not explain to you in great detail this, but you know that you are allowed freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is guaranteed in India. You are free to think anything, thought, expression and association. You can also formulate association. But please remember, all these are with a rider. Rider is what? Government can impose reasonable restriction. Suppose you are trying to subvert the government, you are trying to say compromise the sovereignty of the country, you are trying to work with our opponents to divide India, or your freedom of speech is trying to create a conflict between Hindus and Muslims, it is spreading communal rights, then definitely government has a right to interfere and impose reasonable restriction. And if you feel that the restriction imposed by the government is not reasonable, you can always go to the High Court, you can always go to the Supreme Court, and the High Court and the Supreme Court have the responsibility of ensuring fundamental rights, and they will examine whether the restriction imposed by the government is reasonable or not. If they say the restriction is not reasonable, then government is bound to withdraw that restriction. So, that is what is meaning. So, without these things, without these fundamental rights, you cannot rise to be your best self. What is the meaning of fundamental rights? Fundamental rights are those conditions, let me repeat, fundamental rights are those conditions without which no one can be his or her best self. try to understand. Fundamental rights are for allowing to you to become your best. ताकू जदि ओडिया बुझा मौलिक अधिकार कौन जे सरकार गोटे दायित्व रही एभली एक वातावरण सृष्टि करेंगे एभली तुमको अधिकार देवे जहाँ माध्यम से अधिकार बल तुम्हें तुमर जहाँ अंतर्निहित गुण सब अच्छी संभाव्यता रही तुम्हें विकसित हब. फंडामेंटल राइट. You see, 2 days back a viral video came. A small girl in Manipur, hardly 8 years old, is holding her own sister who is 2-year-old in her lap and going to school and studying in the school. What can she do? Her father and mother are working in the field, both. A small kid is there, her sister is there. So, she is going with her sister and she is holding her on the lap and simultaneously trying to study in the school. Now think what kind of determination the little girl has to study. Now immediately the Manipur government stepped in and said, no, it will take responsibility for her education. What is this case? She has a fundamental right to education. Now if she cannot go to school, she cannot study, that means her fundamental right is compromised. She cannot rise to her potentiality. And that is why the government must ensure that she has exercises. She not only has a right to education, but that right to education is fruitful, is actually available to her. So that is why so many welfare schemes. Why so many welfare schemes the government is running? So many facilities for girl child, so many facilities for SC, ST, so many facilities for poor and all that. Why it is happening? Because the government of India, the state government wants to create such condition that you rise to be your best self. That is what we mean by fundamental rights. Rights are those conditions without which no one can grow to be his or her best self. So that is why even today we recognize that health should be a fundamental right. Many people are arguing. The state governments and central governments have come up with various schemes to ensure that you get health services. During the pandemics, this recent pandemics, government did run hospitals. Lot of expenditure was made. Government did not ask whether you are poor or rich, but pandemics was handled. Ready-made hospitals were created. Private hospitals were rolled in. Even in China, a 10-storied building hospital was built within no time, very quickly. And everywhere in Europe, India, China, everywhere the governments tried their best to address the issues of health issues during the pandemic. And I must say that many governments did exceedingly well. Of course, India also did exceedingly well, notwithstanding there were many deaths also. But even then our government tried. State government also tried their best. So that is what is. So that is what we mean. Fundamental rights are just not few lines in our Indian constitution. The government has a responsibility, because why we are trying to do something? Because we are a democracy. We are for the people. By the people I have already explained to you. For the people. It stands for the people. That is what we say. Apart from political democracy, social and economic democracy was Constitution's real aim. Democracy is not limited to politics. Democracy is not limited to giving vote every 5 years. Then the government forgets you, you also forget the government. That is not the case. We have to also ensure economic and social democracy. How can you ensure social and economic democracy? Economic democracy will mean that the minimum financial condition that is required not only to keep your body and soul together, not only to live your life, but also to grow. That is why economic democracy also comes in. It means that all the wealth is not just concentrated in few hands, and social democracy means that you are not discriminated. Only high born people are getting opportunities, or say high caste people are getting opportunity, or people of one religion are getting opportunity. In that case, that is not a social democracy. So, social democracy. Democracy has economic dimensions and social dimensions. I have already explained to you, we are a parliamentary democracy. The executive are part of the legislature and responsible to the legislature. This I have already explained to you. Elections are held once in 5 years and people can always change their government. We have already discussed this. Democracy is not a mere political concept. It also prescribes social democracy and economic democracy. The last point, but not the least, democracy is also considered to be a way of life. This is very important. Democracy is a way of life. What do we mean by democracy as a way of life? That is precisely the value when it is lived by the citizens. That is coming to the practice of the values. And how can we practice that value when we say democracy is a way of life? The great political thinker and a great politician, Harold J. Lasky, who was a professor of political science in the London School of Economics, a great political leader, a member of the House of Commons in England, and who had great support for India's freedom in 1940s. And what does he say? Democracy is a way of life where politics is of more or less, not of this or that. Though the sentence seems to be very simple, it has lots of shades of meaning. Try to understand this. Lasky's concept that democracy is a way of life where politics is not of this or that, but of more or less. That means in a country where politics is practiced with mutual respect. If the BJP says constantly, it used to say for initially out of political immaturity, saying that Congress Mukt Bharat. Today, the Prime Minister has never said Congress Mukt Bharat. Today, the Prime Minister is saying India also needs the Congress. Why the Prime Minister needs the Congress? Because all Prime Minister need opposition. If there is no opposition, no voice of opposition in the parliament, no voice of opposition in the streets, then democracy cannot succeed. It will become dictatorship of a political party or of an individual. I can give you various examples. Very recently, when Padma Awards were given, many people may have been surprised when Ghulam Nabi Azad, a leader from the opposition, was given a Padma Shri Award. When in 1971, there was going to be a war with Pakistan. A war happened in the month of December or November 1971. You have to check out from internet. And in October, the General Assembly of the UNO was to meet. Indira Gandhi, who was the Congress Prime Minister, requested Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Then he was in Jansangh, which is the father of BJP, and requested Atal Bihari Vajpayee, go and represent India in the UNO. Now, Vajpayee was a leader of the opposition. He was asked to represent India. What does that signify? It signifies that when it comes to our national interest, when it comes to India's interest, there is no ruling party, no opposition party. Both can come together for the welfare of the country. Both can come together for the welfare of the country. There are numerous occasions in the parliament where the opposition has supported the government. It is just not always that on all issues the government and the opposition quarrel with each other, they come to the well of the house, they do not allow the proceedings to go on. No. That is not the whole story. A democracy cannot succeed unless there is opposition to the government also, because then all aspects of any issue can be discussed. So, there must be a general consensus how to proceed. Now, when this Ukraine crisis has come, the government is supporting the Prime Minister, opposition is supporting the Prime Minister. There are many people who discuss the Ukraine policy of India in the newspapers, in the radios. If you say anything against the government and you are immediately dubbed as anti-national, whether there is a Congress government or a BJP government or any other government, then what happens? Democracy cannot succeed. Now, politics does not only depend on the parliament, it filters down to the tea shops, it filters down to the village barandas, it filters down to the Bhagavata Tungis, it filters down to the clubs, and there also we must discuss. Those who are good students of political science and those who want to be good students of history and economics, I will request you to read a beautiful book, The Argumentative Indians. The Argumentative Indians. You have to find out who is the great author who has received a Nobel Prize in economics. The Argumentative Indian. And what happens is that when you are in that book he argues, now you can imagine who was the author. In that book I will tell you in the next class. What he says is that there must be public debates on all issues relating to our policies of the government. We need both the ruling party, we need the opposition, and we must argue, debate and then decide. Look at every aspect of the issue, for and against, that is necessary. Even in your college debate, even in your college election, everywhere what happens is that a good democracy means that there is debate. Suppose in contrast China says it is a democracy, what happens in that country? Only the ruling party, Communist Party of China will give a candidate, there is no opposite candidate. So, it is a sham democracy, farce. Only one candidate stands and he gets elected. And how many members are there in the Chinese assembly? Some 2000, 3000 members are there. No debate takes place. Everybody stands up and claps in the same fashion. Any resolution which comes from the government, everybody claps. Yes, yes, yes. That is how democracy also exists in North Korea. There is no democracy. Just by holding an election and then everybody coming to the parliament and whatever the president or the prime minister says, everybody standing up and clapping in the same manner, in a musical fashion, you call that democracy? Democracy is impossible without opposition. The second point in democracy in life, as a way of life, is that you must be democratic. How can I be democratic? I have to listen to the opposite point of view. I have to listen to the opposite point of view. Those who are opposing me, what they are saying, I have to listen, I have to tolerate. If I refuse to tolerate dissenting voices, if I do not allow the newspapers to give any dissenting opinion, then it is not a democracy. Where freedom of expression is not there, freedom of thought is not there, how can there be a democracy? It is not just for the government. In your day-to-day life, suppose you are in a family, you are a father. If your son is saying something and he does not agree with you, you must allow your son to say no. You can't say, no, you have not reached the age. How can you say, what do you know of the world? I know everything, I am now old. No, that is not the case. Or if the son says, Papa, you are too old, you do not know the modern world, how things have changed, you do not know how to use internet, what is the point of your telling? You do not want to listen to your papa does not want to listen to you. Are you a democratic family? No. Democracy is a way of life when we listen to each other, when we discuss, when we are open-minded, then only we can say that we are democratic. So, that is very important, that democracy is a way of life. It is not merely a political or a legal concept. It is just not about 5-year elections. It is just not election once in 5 years, but it is a way of life. So, that is what democracy is all about. Thank you.